Have you ever felt your world shift beneath your feet so suddenly that you weren't sure which way was up, ever wondered how a simple life lesson from your parents can echo through decades, only to collide with choices you never imagined? I'm Grandma Betty, speaking to you from my little sweet shop in Charleston, South Carolina. But don't let the cozy pastel walls and the scent of cinnamon fool you. My story didn't unfold in one gentle arc. I grew up in a humble, dirt-floored house in rural Kentucky, learned the meaning of hard work from sunrise fields, and carried those values all the way to the heart of Los Angeles. There, among the roar of car stereos and the calls of street vendors, I built a family of 6 children, dreaming that love and honesty would protect us from anything. Then one night, everything changed. I won't give away every twist right now, because I want you to experience those moments alongside me. The shock, the heartbreak, and the unexpected sparks of hope that followed. What I will say is this: I believe in second chances. I believe that no matter how deep the wounds, there is a way forward. And over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to share with you not only what happened to me and my family, but how we found strength in places we never thought to look. You'll hear about the lessons that sustained me when fear felt overwhelming, the surprising power of therapy when hope seemed lost, and the small acts of kindness from neighbors, from strangers, even from tough love friends, that reminded me we're never truly alone. I'll talk about the day I had to decide whether to turn away from the home I loved, and the day I discovered you can rebuild even the most shattered dreams. This isn't a tale of blame or bitterness. It's a journey through valleys of despair and peaks of possibility, filled with laughter, tears, mistakes, and moments of pure grace. If you've ever faced betrayal, wondered how to forgive, or wondered if you have the courage to begin again, you'll find pieces of your own story in mine. So settle in with your favorite drink, find a comfy spot, and let's walk this path together. No spoilers, just an honest conversation about loss, love, and the stubborn spark that keeps us reaching for the light. By the end, I hope you'll feel uplifted, a little wiser, and ready to face your own unknown chapters with a braver heart. Ready, let's begin. I was born in 1953 in a tiny place called Millerville, Kentucky, a dot on the map where people waved as they passed in their pickup trucks, and the rhythm of life followed the sun. Our house had a dirt floor that turned to sticky mud in spring rains, and the single light bulb hanging from the rafters cast long shadows across the worn wooden furniture. We didn't have much in the way of material comforts, but that home was overflowing with something richer, a sense of purpose, unity, and unshakable values. My father, George, rose before dawn every day to work the fields. He planted corn, beans, and potatoes, whatever would feed us, or fetch a little money at the market. I still remember the smell of fresh-turned earth, the sharp snap of bean vines as we pulled them from the ground, and the way his strong, dirt-stained hands would brush my hair back when I came out to help. My mother, Mary, held down the fort at home. She cooked cornbread on a wood stove, canned peaches and blackberries in mason jars, and sewed patched-over knees in my overalls. On Sundays, when the work paused and the church bells rang across the valley, she'd dress us kids in our best simple cotton dresses and crisp collared shirts, and in the evenings, she'd hush us with a hymn before tucking us in. From those early days, I absorbed 3 truths without ever hearing them stated outright. Hard work is non-negotiable. When you're hungry, or when there's school books to buy, you show up. You plant seeds, tend rows, and count every ear of corn. No complaining, just doing. Family comes first. We shared meals at a single table, whispered bedtime prayers together, and scraped together every last penny to make sure nobody went to bed cold or hungry. Honesty shapes your character. If you made a mistake, broke a jar of preserves in the pantry, you fessed up. My parents believed a clear conscience was worth far more than anything money could buy. I'll never forget the day we lost half our crop to a late frost. I was 12 and saw the green stalks turn black overnight. My father didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "Betty, come help me bury these plants." We gathered the stalks into neat rows, turned over the soil again, and he taught me how seasons could be cruel, but resilience would carry us through. That afternoon, dripping sweat in the summer heat, I realized that setbacks weren't failures. They were invitations to adapt. At 13, I remember plucking rattlesnakes off the porch step with my father's old shovel, an ugly but necessary chore to keep us safe. I learned not to shy away from the uncomfortable or the dangerous. In that small but fearless act, I discovered that bravery isn't about fury. It's about facing what must be faced calmly and deliberately. By age 15, I was working alongside my mother, canning up to 50 jars of peach preserves each summer. My hands pruned fruit-laden branches at dawn and stirred steaming vats of sugar syrup by midday. But the sweetest lesson came in the silence of those moments, stewing fruit and whispering prayers when she'd say, "A woman must be able to stand on her own, Betty. Depend on no one but yourself first." I'd roll the mason jar rims with hot wax, marveling at the seal that kept life fresh inside. That seal became a symbol for me. No matter how life shook me, I would preserve my integrity. I want to pause here to share a couple of practical takeaways from those Kentucky years. Little tools you can carry with you. No matter where life plants you, start each day by tackling the toughest task first. My father always said that the hardest chores at dawn make the rest of the day feel lighter. Try it yourself. Identify one thing you dread making that phone call, clearing your inbox, and get it done before breakfast. You'll be amazed at how much momentum you build. Create pockets of togetherness. Even if your family or your household is small, prioritize a shared ritual. It doesn't have to be elaborate. A 5-minute cup of coffee together, a weekly walk around the block, or passing around a gratitude jar can reinforce that sense of unity we thrived on in Millerville. Own your mistakes. No one held a grudge in our household for long. What mattered was that you owned up, apologized sincerely, and made amends. Practicing this builds credibility and frees you from carrying guilt around like a heavy stone. Looking back, I see how those early lessons laid the foundation for everything that came later. When we left Kentucky for Los Angeles, I carried that dirt floor resilience in my bones. When I encountered setbacks, whether it was unwelcoming city streets, a big family to feed on a single income, or challenges that threatened to break our spirits, I remembered how to dig in, adapt, and face the day. It wasn't an easy childhood by any means. There were days I cried into my pillow when the rains washed away a week's worth of pickings, or when I felt the pinch of embarrassment at school for wearing hand-me-downs. But the pride I felt helping my parents, the value of honest effort, and the warmth of knowing they had my back made every hardship worth weathering. As I dust off these memories, I realize that no matter how far I traveled, first to the bustling projects of South Central LA, then to Bakersfield, and finally to the pastel-hued streets of Charleston. Those roots in Kentucky remained my compass. In times of crisis, I could close my eyes and feel the sun on the back of my neck, hear my father's quiet encouragement, and taste my mother's blackberry jam lingering on my tongue. Soon, I'll share how our family took that rural foundation and carried it all the way to a high-rise cityscape, chasing hope and dreaming bigger than we ever imagined. But first, let's gather our suitcases, just as we did when the drought forced us onto that crowded bus, and prepare to embark on the next leg of this journey, crossing the country and planting ourselves in the heart of Los Angeles, where the real test of those Kentucky-forged values awaited. When the drought hit Kentucky in 1969, it wasn't just our corn and bean crops that withered. It was our sense of security. One day, the fields were green and promising. The next, they were parched husks under an unrelenting sun. Watching my father stare across those cracked rows, I knew that our family's future lay not in that tired soil, but somewhere far beyond the hills of Millerville. So with 2 cardboard suitcases and hearts full of hope, we boarded a crowded bus bound for Los Angeles, where the possibilities glowed like neon lights, but the challenges lurked in every unfamiliar alley. I'll never forget that bus ride. It smelled of diesel fumes and anxious excitement. Families whispered their dreams as the miles clicked past, and children pressed their faces against windows to watch the landscape shift from rolling pastures to endless freeways. For me, at 16, it felt like the whole world was waiting on the other side of each horizon. I clung to my mother's hand, feeling both terrified and exhilarated, ready to trade mud floors for concrete sidewalks, but not yet knowing what price we'd pay. Arriving in South Central LA was like stepping into a different planet. Gone were the church steeples and dusty roads. In their place stood blocks of stucco houses, chain-link fences, and sun-baked pavement. Car stereos roared bass notes on Sunday mornings. Street vendors hawked tacos from converted vans. Neighbors sat on porch steps, shouting greetings in Spanish English, and the rhythmic patois of a multicultural community. It was crowded, noisy, and teeming with life, and it felt as foreign as another continent. Our first home was a small duplex shared with another migrant family. We slept on air mattresses in a single room, and our bathroom was down the hall, shared by 6 households. My father found work in a nearby textile mill. My mother cleaned luxury homes in Beverly Hills, waking at 4 a.m. to catch 3 buses. I enrolled in a public high school, where my hillbilly accent made me stand out, and I took a part-time job at a bakery kneading dough after class. Every aspect of our old life, early bedtimes by candlelight, the slow rhythm of planting seasons, got replaced by a hustling pace I couldn't yet keep up with. At first, I clung to routines that felt familiar. I tried mapping our new neighborhood against what I knew the big hill over there must line up with the ridge near our farm. Of course it didn't. Grasping Los Angeles meant learning a new geography, a new social code, and a new economic reality. But as the weeks passed, I discovered small ways to root myself. I found a community garden tucked between 2 busy streets. I volunteered on weekends, digging in raised beds alongside other migrants and longtime residents. The taste of homegrown tomatoes reminded me of Kentucky's summer fruit and reminded me that life could bloom here too. I made friends with Carmen, whose family emigrated from Mexico. She taught me how to navigate the bus routes, shared her mother's homemade tamales, and showed me the importance of bilingual street signs. With her guidance, I realized that speaking English wasn't enough. I needed to listen for the unspoken cues, who nodded first in conversation, which streets to avoid at dusk, and how to ask for help without losing face. At the bakery, I learned the city's work ethic: long hours, no breaks, tips earned by friendliness and speed. My coworkers came from El Salvador, Samoa, the Philippines. We exchanged life stories over trays of croissants, and I picked up not only techniques for perfect dough, but also a lesson in humility. Everyone carried a story heavier than their apron. My parents' decision to uproot was born from necessity, but families still migrate today for many reasons: economic opportunity, educational access, or the chance to join loved ones. The promise of higher wages and better schools can be powerful. Yet without careful planning, a move to a big city can strain finances, relationships, and mental health. Underestimating costs. We thought a textile mill job and domestic work would cover rent, utilities, and groceries. But California living was expensive, even in 1969. We scrambled to cover doctor visits and school supplies. If you're planning a similar move, research housing markets, transportation expenses, and local school fees. Create a realistic budget that includes an emergency cushion. Overlooking support networks. In Kentucky, we had cousins, church friends, and longtime neighbors. In LA, we arrived strangers. It took months to rebuild a circle of trust through church services, community centers, and that little garden. Before you move, reach out online or by phone to local community groups, ethnic associations, or faith organizations. Anyone who can offer a warm introduction. Navigating cultural shifts even within the same country. Regional cultures differ wildly. I went from Southern hospitality to a fast-paced West Coast directness. Recognize that fresh attitudes toward punctuality, formalities, and personal space may require you to adapt your communication style. Observe closely and ask questions instead of assuming everyone thinks like you. One thing that never budged was the core of what I learned in Kentucky: hard work, family unity, and honesty. But I had to translate those values for a city environment: hard work. In Millerville, that meant plowing fields. In LA, it meant mastering factory machinery and cleaning silver candlesticks in wealthy homes. I learned that effort looks different across contexts, but the principle remains: show up, stay focused, and do more than is asked. Family first. Back home, we had Sunday dinners where everyone gathered around the table. In South Central, our schedules juggled night shifts, after-school activities, and bus connections. So we carved out a new ritual every Friday night. No matter what, we shared a simple meal: rice and beans, fried chicken, or store-bought pizza, and told each other our highs and lows of the week. That became our anchor. Honesty. When I struggled in math class or hurt a friend's feelings, I didn't hide it. I admitted my mistakes, sought help from teachers after school, and offered sincere apologies. In a city full of winks and half-truths, being straightforward made me a trusted friend and teammate. Looking back on that leap from the hills of Kentucky to the heart of Los Angeles, I see both the exhilaration of possibility and the sting of disorientation. Here are a few insights I wish someone had shared with me before we set out. Start small, connect. Quickly find one local spot, a library, community center, corner market, where you can become a regular. Familiar faces and friendly nods make a big city feel less anonymous. Balance tradition and flexibility. You don't have to abandon all your old ways. Keep your family rituals alive, but be open to new customs that bring you closer to your neighbors. Track your progress early on. I kept a simple journal. Today, I rode 3 buses without getting lost, or I made a new friend at the community garden. Those small victories reminded me that every adaptation built toward belonging. We arrived in South Central with hope in our pockets and uncertainty in our hearts, ready to work, learn, and belong. In the next section, I'll share how amid the sun-baked streets and humming factories, I found love in an unexpected place, a neighborhood bakery where a young delivery man named Richard taught me that even in chaos, kindness blooms. We'll explore the story of our courtship, the challenges we faced as a young couple in the inner city, and how the values from my Kentucky upbringing guided me through those early days. Hold on tight, because love in LA had its own lessons to offer. When I stepped into that little bakery on Central Avenue for my first shift, I didn't expect to meet the man who would become my husband. I was 17, fresh from long days at school, and even longer nights worrying about my family's survival. The scent of warm bread and sugar was a comforting reminder of home, but it was Richard's easy smile that truly warmed me. He was delivering fresh loaves to the shop, tall, strong, and with a confidence that belied his modest upbringing. At 22, he'd learned to work from the ground up, born in the projects, raised by a single mother who scrubbed floors for a living. He dropped out of school after 4th grade to help make ends meet. Yet, he carried himself with a quiet intelligence, ready to discuss everything, from football scores to the civil rights marches he'd only read about on worn magazines. When he offered to help me load boxes into the storeroom, I felt a flutter of hope I hadn't known I still possessed. Choosing to court or even to date during financial hardship is a deliberate act of hope. When you're worried about rent, groceries, in the safety of your family, asking someone out feels almost indulgent. Sociologically speaking, the 1970s saw teen marriage rates climb in urban areas like South Central LA, as young couples believed that pooling resources was the fastest path to stability. Yet too often, they overlooked the emotional groundwork a lasting partnership requires. I knew that if romance had any chance of blossoming between Richard and me, we had to be honest from the start about our goals, our fears, and our limits. I won't romanticize it. Our conversations included negotiating how much of his paycheck went to rent versus groceries, and whether I could cover an extra bakery shift or he could pick up a weekend paper route. Those weren't glamorous courtship talks, but they were essential. Despite the weight of responsibility, we carved out moments that felt, for a little while, truly ours. Sunday morning walks. After delivering fresh pastries to the nearby grocery stores, he'd join me for a walk around our block. We'd stop by a street vendor for tamales, share a single napkin, and talk about our dreams, building a home, giving our children better opportunities than we'd had, and someday owning a small piece of land just the way my parents had. Hidden notes in loaves one afternoon, I found a slip of paper tucked inside a baguette box. Meet me at the corner bench at 6. That brief, clandestine rendezvous. Me clutching my apron strings as I rushed through the back door felt like teenage mischief, a reminder that even under hardship, love can be playful. Shared chores as bonding. We learned each other's rhythms by working side by side, I kneading dough, he arranging trays for delivery. Sweat and flour dusted our clothes, but the rhythm of stacking loaves and sealing boxes became our unspoken language of trust and cooperation. Through these small rituals, we discovered 3 core principles that would carry our partnership forward. Communication is everything. When you're tired from juggling work and family stress, it's easy to let misunderstandings fester. We made it a rule to pause before bed and ask, "What do you need from me tomorrow?" That single question became our nightly anchor. Celebrate small victories. One day, I sold out of my specialty cinnamon rolls at the bakery, a first for me. He came in on his lunch break just to buy the last one and smiled like I'd given him a crown. Celebrating that victory together reminded me that encouragement is the fuel for perseverance. Respect each other's roots. He never mocked my Kentucky drawl, and I never belittled his project-honed slang. Instead, we learned from each other's backgrounds, swapping recipes for sweet potato biscuits and birria tacos, finding that culinary exchange deepened our bond beyond words. In the early 1970s, traditional gender expectations still held strong, even in a modern city. Women were often expected to shoulder household chores, while men brought home the paycheck. But in our world of split shifts and part-time gigs, those lines blurred. There were weeks when he'd work night shifts at the cigarette factory, while I managed a 5 a.m. bakery run. Other times, he'd cover school pickup when I steamed silverware in Beverly Hills mansions. We quickly realized that clinging to outdated roles and only created friction. Instead, we approached our partnership as a team. If he had a surge of overtime hours, I'd bridge the gap with my sewing machine at home. If I faced a brutal week at the bakery, he'd bring home a simple takeout dinner and handle bedtime for my younger siblings. We openly negotiated chores and shifts based on who had a lighter load, rather than defaulting to woman takes care of the home or man handles finances. This fluid division of labor felt radical at the time, but practical examples, like him washing dishes after my overnight shift or me changing the oil on his delivery van, taught me that true respect comes from honoring each other's contributions, no matter how society defines them. After 2 years of dating, years filled with laughter over burnt rolls, tears over occasional paycheck shortages, and shared dreams scribbled on napkins, we knew we were ready to make a lifelong commitment. In 1972, at 19 and 24, we stood before a small congregation in our neighborhood church. My wedding dress was home-sewn, and the reception was potluck style, with neighbors contributing cornbread and tamales. We didn't have a professional photographer, but friends captured the day on a hand-me-down Polaroid, and those faded prints still hang on our living room wall. The true magic of that ceremony wasn't in the lace or flowers. It was in the vows we'd crafted together. I promise to support you when you feel weak, to celebrate you when you succeed, and to stand by you when life tests us. Those words weren't recited as mere formality. They were a deliberate promise, rooted in the years we'd already weathered together. Our story unfolded decades ago, but the principles still resonate. Whether you're dating in a big city or settling down in a small town, here are a few takeaways. Talk finances openly. Money stress is one of the top causes of relationship strife. Early in our courtship, we drafted a simple budget: rent, utilities, groceries, savings. Even if your numbers differ, the act of putting them on paper builds trust. Share household responsibilities flexibly. Traditional roles rarely align with modern realities. List out what needs doing, cooking, cleaning errands, and divide tasks based on availability and skills, not outdated stereotypes. Create little rituals. It could be a weekly coffee date, a daily high five after work, or hiding notes in unexpected places. Small gestures communicate care and keep the spark alive. Honor each other's background. Take time to learn your partner's family traditions. Whether it's attending a Sunday barbecue, celebrating a cultural holiday, or just sampling each other's favorite foods, those shared experiences build empathy. With wedding bells still echoing in our memories, we set out to build a home in South Central LA. Our first apartment was no palace. One room divided by a curtain, a single bathroom shared by 4 families, but it was ours. In that modest space, we welcomed our first son, dreamed of adding a second bedroom, and began the complicated, amazing journey of growing a family of 7. In the next section, we'll explore family of 7 triumphs and trials of rapid growth, where I'll share how we balanced the joy of 5 sons and a daughter with the logistics, finances, and emotional challenges that come with such a bustling household. You'll see how our Kentucky-rooted values guided us through sleepless nights, diaper changes, and the financial tightrope of raising 6 children on a factory and bakery income. Let's dive in and discover the art of making space, both physical and emotional, for a rapidly growing clan. By the time I turned 30, our little apartment behind the bakery had expanded from a cozy honeymoon nest into a bustling home of 8. 5 boys, Mark, Alex, Wesley, Frank, and Charlie, arrived between 1973 and 1981. And finally, our daughter Christine in 1984. Each new life meant an extra heartbeat in our family's rhythm, and one more mouth to feed, one more pair of shoes to buy, one more child to tuck in at night. In Kentucky, I'd watched my parents tend a small farmhouse and feed 6 people from their garden and preserves. In LA, feeding 7 on a factory paycheck and a baker's wages felt like trying to fill an ocean with a bucket. Yet, I refused to let scarcity define us. Instead, I treated each addition to our family as an invitation to grow stronger in creativity, teamwork, and love. Our first apartment was a single room divided by a threadbare curtain. The bedroom side held 2 twin mattresses on the floor. The living side housed a rickety couch, a small table, and a second mattress for weekend guests. One bathroom shared with 4 other families in the building meant early morning jockeying for the shower and careful rationing of soap. When our third son Wesley arrived, we realized we needed more space, or at least the illusion of it. Richard and I scoured neighborhood salvage yards for wooden pallets, built a low platform bed for the boys to share, and used vinyl shower curtains to create individual zones in the room. Each child hung a small picture or a piece of fabric over their space, giving them a tiny corner to call their own. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Comparatively, other large families in auto-centric cities did the same, converting garages into playrooms, stacking bunks to fit more beds, or using fold-out tables at mealtime. In those tight quarters, ingenuity wasn't optional. It was essential. I learned early on that physical space could be compressed so long as emotional space, time, attention, and affection remained abundant. Balancing the budget became our nightly ritual. Over supper, usually rice and beans, with a side of whatever veggie was on sale, Richard and I spread out receipts on the table: rent, utilities, groceries, school supplies, and soon sports fees. We each held half the responsibility. I tracked the pantry and clothing needs. He watched the paycheck and overtime hours. When Mark needed new cleats for Little League, I negotiated a swap. I'd sew up his kindergarten uniform one more time in exchange for holding off on a new pair until the next payday. At the same time, I shopped sales at the local swap meet, finding hand-me-down jackets or discounted school shoes. If we hit a tight week, I took on extra sewing repairs for neighbors, and Richard picked up an evening shift at the factory. Yet even the best negotiating can stretch too thin. I remember one month when we'd underestimated the cost of winter coats, and our gas bill jumped during a cold snap. We skipped a bakery shift to make space for an extra factory job, but it nearly broke us. From that, I learned to build a small rainy day fund, $5 set aside each week, so that when unplanned expenses arrived, we had a cushion. With 7 hearts beating under one roof, it was easy for a child to feel overlooked. I remember Alex, our second son, coming home from school one day with tears in his eyes, saying I'd forgotten to ask about his big spelling test. In my mind, I'd prioritized dinner prep over his homework concerns. That moment stung. No matter how many mouths you fill, every child deserves to know you see them. To keep individual connections alive, I set up simple rituals, one-on-one Sundays. Every Sunday afternoon, one child chose an activity with me or Daddy, walking to the park, picking fruit at the corner stand, or simply riding the bus and talking. Over a year, we rotated through all 6 children, ensuring each had solo time. Report card, celebrations, no matter how small the grade. I cooked each child's favorite breakfast. The morning after, report cards arrived, praising efforts and setting simple goals for the next term. Bedtime story, switch. Instead of reading to all 5 boys at once, I let one child choose a short story each night while the others quietly drew pictures or played with blocks. That 15 minutes felt like a world apart. These small investments paid off in trust. I saw each child's confidence grow, heard later how those moments sustained them in tough times, and understood that raising a large family wasn't a zero-sum game. Attention could multiply when given mindfully. Even the best-intentioned parents slip. In our early years, we made a few mistakes worth sharing, assuming uniformity. We once bought identical coats for all the boys to simplify shopping, only to discover Mark hated the color and refused to wear it. Lesson learned: personal preferences matter, even when budgets are tight. Overscheduling. Eager for our sons to find positive outlets, we signed them up for every after-school program we could afford: soccer, Cub Scouts, piano lessons. But shuttling them from one activity to the next left all of us exhausted. We had to learn that downtime, unstructured play, and family evenings was equally valuable. Neglecting self-care. For the first few years, I poured everything into the kids and household, ignoring my own health and friendships. I burned out, became short-tempered, and taught by example that exhaustion was normal. It took a friend's gentle nudge to remind me that a refreshed mother meant a happier home. By acknowledging these missteps, we recalibrated. We asked each child what activities they truly loved, freed up our calendar, and scheduled a monthly Mom's Night Out, where I shared dinner with friends, while Daddy held down the fort. All the trials came with triumphs. I delighted in seeing Mark drift toward books rather than baseball, discovering Alex's knack for numbers, or hearing Wesley burst into song after church. Frank's quiet sketches surprised me with his artistic flair, and little Charlie's laugh, pure and unfiltered, never failed to brighten a weary day. And when Christine arrived as our only daughter, she brought with her a calm, gentle presence that grounded us all. These moments reminded me why we chose this path. In a smaller family, each child's achievements might not have felt as dramatic. Here, every success, big or small, was amplified by 5 cheering siblings. Family dinners turned into roaring pep rallies when one child brought home a good grade or scored a goal. Those celebrations wove resilience into our family's fabric. In today's world, with high housing costs and busy schedules, raising a big family can feel daunting. But some principles remain timeless. Prioritize connection over perfection. You can't have a flawless home or never miss a test detail, but intentionally scheduled one-on-one moments build lasting bonds. Plan for the unplanned, a small emergency fund and realistic budget guard against the stress of surprise bills. Embrace community resources. We leaned on free community centers for after-school care, borrowed uniforms from church groups, and swapped baby clothes with neighbors. Modern families can tap into parenting co-ops, online marketplaces, and local nonprofits. Set boundaries on activities, let children explore, but avoid the trap of always busy. Space to dream, rest, and play fuels creativity and reduces burnout for you and the kids. By 1981, our home buzzed with the footsteps and voices of 7 busy souls. We'd learned to stretch rooms' budgets and our own patience. But as the 1980s unfolded, a new challenge crept in from outside our walls rather than within them. South Central's streets became tinged with the lure of quick money drugs and gangs. And in the next section, When the Streets Call, I'll share how our brother's early teenage years intersected with these pressures, the warning signs we missed in the real-world programs and conversations that might have steered them differently. It's a story of parental vigilance, community support, and what happens when good kids make risky choices. Let's walk that path together and learn how to recognize danger before it knocks on your door. By the mid-1980s, our home in South Central LA was still full of laughter, sibling squabbles, and the smells of home-cooked dinners. But beyond our curtained bedroom windows, a different current was rising, one I hadn't fully recognized until it was almost too late. I want to share how my boys born and raised on my kitchen floor and my husband's strong arms began slipping into behaviors that led them down dark paths. Knowing these warning signs and having strategies to address them early can make all the difference for families today. Adolescence brings change, mood swings, testing boundaries, and peer pressure. My oldest, Mark, was a model student through grade school, always eager to help me fold laundry or coach his younger brothers on their reading. But when he turned 13, things shifted. He started coming home an hour late, saying he'd lost track of time playing basketball with neighborhood friends. His grades dipped from A's to B's and C's. I chalked it up to normal teen rebellion until I discovered a pack of cigarettes hidden under his mattress. 2 years later, his younger brother Alex followed suit. At first, it was about fitting in. Everyone's doing it, he'd say. Wesley, only 10 at the time, watched his older brothers and began sneaking off to watch them hang out on the corner. Before I knew it, skipping school became a trio activity. They'd slip away during math class, telling friends they felt sick, then converge under a billboard to smoke and share stolen snacks from the corner store. Across the country, the war on drugs was fueling an underground economy. Gangs offered status quick cash, and most dangerously, a sense of belonging, when home life felt too strict or too overwhelming. In neighborhoods like ours, where community centers struggled under budget cuts and after-school programs, closed, vulnerable kids often turned to the streets for structure and excitement. What started as small acts of defiance, shoplifting candy bars, or borrowing a neighbor's bike, quickly escalated. Mark began running small errands for older teens, delivering fold-up radios or stolen jerseys in exchange for pocket money. One afternoon, I found a stack of uncashed paychecks in his backpack. Someone gave me cash to hold on to them. He lied, his eyes darting away. I confronted him gently, asking if he needed extra help with school or if he felt I was too busy. He shrugged and muttered, "I just needed money." Beneath that excuse lay fear that he couldn't measure up, that he was invisible beside the 4 other boys I cared for, and that he had to prove himself somewhere, anywhere outside our cramped apartment. By the time Wesley, at 14, confessed to shoplifting a lighter from a gas station, the spiral was in full swing. It wasn't just about money. It was about respect on the street identity and a misguided belief that danger equaled power. I remember standing in my kitchen heart, in my throat, as he told me he'd sold small amounts of marijuana for quick cash. My stomach churned with guilt. Had I been too lenient? Had I missed the neighborhood warnings? It wasn't just our family dynamics at fault. Overcrowded schools meant guidance counselors had cases thousands of students long. Police presence was heavy, but often adversarial. So many kids distrusted law enforcement, rather than seeing them as protectors. Churches and nonprofits operated on shoestring budgets, offering a few music or tutoring classes per week, never enough to reach every at-risk teen. Contrast that with communities that invested in robust after-school programs, mentorship initiatives, and youth job training. Cities where kids could join a recreational soccer league, learn computer skills at a library workshop, or spend evenings in a well-staffed rec center saw lower rates of juvenile crime. When the streets call, a strong community safety net can answer back. Looking back, I wish I'd known to act at the very first sign of trouble. Here are a few strategies that might have changed our path. Open conversations. Rather than reacting with punishment or lectures, set aside daily check-in time. Invite your teen to share 3 things they're proud of and 3 things they're worried about. This simple ritual builds trust and surfaces issues early. Alternative activities. When a neighborhood rec center closed due to funding cuts, I started a kitchen club once a week, teaching Mark and Alex basic cooking skills. It gave them responsibility, a chance to earn small stipends, and kept them off the streets for a few more hours each week. Mentorship pairings. I reached out to Mr. Johnson, our friendly neighbor from 2 doors down, who'd raised 4 kids of his own. He agreed to meet the boys for weekly basketball games and conversations. Having an adult outside the family who believed in them made a noticeable difference, even if only for a few months. Restorative justice circles. When Wesley's shoplifting led to a police warning, instead of pressing charges, the station referred him to a restorative circle. He met with the store owner, apologized, and agreed to volunteer 2 Saturdays helping stock shelves. That face-to-face accountability was more impactful than a court date ever could be. While every child is unique, some behaviors often signal a drift toward greater risk. Rapid change in peer group. If your teen's friends become secretive or dismissive of you, investigate gently. Ask about their friends by name. Get to know parents or adults they trust. Unexplained income or items, sudden possession of expensive gadgets, clothing, or cash with no clear source often indicates involvement in illicit activities. Emotional disengagement, withdrawal from family, loss of interest in hobbies they once loved, or a defensive attitude when questioned can all hint at trouble brewing. When I first noticed these signs in Frank, our 4th son, I dismissed it as typical boredom. He was stealing videotapes from a mail-order kiosk and blaming it on needing movies for the sleepovers. But that sleepover was actually at an older cousin's apartment in a known gang territory. It took an intervention by a school counselor and a family meeting with church youth leaders to bring him back from the brink. Despite our best efforts, the three oldest boys, Mark, Alex, and Wesley, eventually became entangled with gangs. Arrests, probation, and a cycle of shame and rebellion followed. Frank and Charlie, watching these older siblings, flirted with the same behaviors. Desperate to earn respect, they believed only the streets could grant. In socioeconomic terms, our family was caught in what researchers call a poverty trap, limited resources, insufficient social supports, and neighborhood norms that valorized street life. Breaking free required more than tough love. It required systemic change we simply didn't have access to at the time. There were moments of hope, though, when my boys glimpsed alternative futures, a welding class. Offered by a local church, Alex excelled at metalwork, using strength that had once fueled aggression to craft lampstands instead of wielding weapons. That class gave him a sense of pride and a vocational direction for a few years. Teen Leadership Workshops, a nonprofit, ran weekend retreats teaching conflict resolution, self-esteem, and career exploration. Mark returned from his first retreat energized, declaring he'd consider college if the money made sense. His hope lingered, even if fleeting. Family contracts. Sitting down with each son to draft a family agreement outlining curfews, chores, and consequences for rule breaks helped clarify expectations. When Wesley violated his part by skipping school, he lost access to his guitar for a week. That tangible repercussion, combined with clear restoration steps, provided structure he'd never had before. Yet even these positive interventions were often too sporadic, too underfunded, and too disconnected from each other. By the late 1990s, the three eldest were fully embroiled in crime, and our home became a battleground of worry, shame, and heartbreak. I share our struggles not to cast blame, but to highlight ways families can step in earlier and more effectively seek out comprehensive youth programs. Rather than relying on a single after-school club, look for organizations that offer mentorship, job training, academic tutoring, and crisis counseling under one roof. Continuity matters. Build your parent network. Connect regularly with other parents, teachers, coaches, and counselors. Share observations and collaborate on strategies rather than handling challenges in isolation. Emphasize skill development over status. Help your child discover talents, art, technology, mechanics that can become real pathways to self-esteem rather than chasing the illusory status of street credibility. Practice restorative accountability. When missteps occur, focus on repairing harm rather than only punishing. This builds empathy and responsibility. As the 1990s dawned, our family was stretched thin by legal battles, emotional scars, and a bitter sense of helplessness. Looking back, I see how the streets, promising respect and quick money, slowly corroded the boys I had once cradled in my arms. But the story doesn't end in despair. In the next chapter, Breaking Point, the night of domestic terror, I'll share the night when everything erupted, the trauma that followed, and how that crucible of pain ultimately forced us to confront our deepest fears and learn what real survival looks like. Let's step into that night together with compassion and clarity as we prepare for the journey toward healing. Nothing in my life had prepared me for that night in September 2000. Not the drought that drove us from Kentucky, not the cramped apartment in South Central LA, nor even the slow descent of my sons into dangerous activities. I'd faced bad crops, tight budgets, and teen rebellion, but I never imagined the danger lurking inside my own home until the night our world shattered. It was a Friday, September 22nd, one of those oppressively hot, late summer evenings. Richard had left for his night shift at the cigarette factory just after dinner, and Christine was at a friend's house working on a school project. I was alone in our living room, folding laundry and humming softly when I heard the gate slam. At first, I thought my husband was back early, but the heavy footsteps and muffled laughter told me otherwise. My heart thudded in my chest as I rose to peek through the curtain. 5 figures lurched together across the yard. My 5 sons, each older, now faces hardened by secrets I hadn't known they carried. They stumbled into the house, filling the hall with the smell of alcohol and smoke. A chill ran through me. This wasn't a harmless teenage prank. They surrounded me in the kitchen, crowding close. I remember the glint of a knife in Wesley's hand, the constricted fear in their eyes. "Where's Dad?" Mark snapped his voice, rougher than I ever heard it. I managed to whisper, "He's at the factory," keeping my voice steady. "And Christine's out." That small lie felt like a betrayal of truth, and I wondered in that instant if I should have told them the facts and risked dragging our daughter into this horror. But the knife's tip rattled against the counter as Wesley pressed it forward, and I knew silence was safer. What followed was a blur of shouts, desperation, and pain. They accused me of lying, of ignoring them, of preferring that factory man over his own blood. Frank hurled a mug at the wall. The crash of broken ceramic echoed like gunfire. Charlie, my youngest son, trembled as he advanced, tears streaming, demanding money for the people who protect us. I try to reach them, remind them of bedtime prayers, of Sunday lunches with my parents, of the love that cradled each of them when they were infants. But it was like speaking to statues, carved from hurt and rage. My pleas bounced off their closed hearts. Something primal snapped in me, the realization that those I had carried in my womb had become strangers, wielding violence in our sanctuary. Then, as abruptly as it began, it ended. They left the house, laughing, packed into the night like predators who'd just hunted their prey. I was left on the cold tile floor, bloodied knuckles from where I'd fought back, broken glass under my elbow, and a terror so deep I could barely breathe. Domestic terror isn't limited to strangers. Statistics show that a significant percentage of family violence comes from people we trust most. In my case, the weapons weren't guns. It was alcohol-fueled rage, pent-up anger, and a tragic sense of entitlement that my sons felt as men in the street, not as children I raised. Key factors that fueled this crisis: substance abuse. Alcohol and drugs lower inhibitions and amplify aggression. My boys had been experimenting for years. On that night, they'd taken it too far. Normalization of violence. Growing up around gang talk and neighborhood scuffles, they saw violence as a tool to assert power and resolve disputes. Emotional disconnection. We'd lost the thread of honest communication. In trying to manage 6 children in a crowded home, I'd missed the depth of their resentment toward me and Richard. In the minutes and hours after they left, I faced a series of urgent needs, medical, legal, and emotional. Here's what I did, and what any parent in a similar crisis can consider. Ensure physical safety. I placed a call to a trusted neighbor, alerting her to stay on the phone with me until I felt safe enough to move. She stayed on the line as I crawled to the bathroom, rinsed bloody cuts, and applied pressure with a clean towel. If you're ever alone and injured, find a secure spot. Call someone you trust immediately, and keep your phone within reach. Document injuries and damage. When Richard returned, I asked him to photograph my wounds and the broken dishes. These images later proved crucial when talking with counselors and, if necessary, law enforcement. In any violent incident, preserve evidence, photos, written notes of what happened, and witness contact information. Seek medical and emotional care. I visited a local clinic the next morning, not only for stitches and painkillers, but to request a referral for trauma counseling. Physical injuries heal faster than emotional scars. Prioritizing mental health early can prevent long-term PTSD. Ask your doctor for trusted therapists or support groups. Establish a support network. I confided in one friend from church and 3 neighbors who agreed to check in on me daily. Having a short list of people you can notify after such an event creates a lifeline. If you don't have contacts, look for local domestic violence hotlines or community centers that offer crisis assistance. In the days and weeks that followed, I pieced together my sense of safety in my belief that I could still parent these boys even from a distance. Here are a few lessons I carried forward. Establish boundaries. Immediately, Richard and I agreed that our sons would no longer have free access to the home when under the influence. We changed locks and installed a simple latch on the gate. Clear boundaries signal that violence has consequences, and they protect everyone. Communicate proactively with remaining children. Christine, spared from that night's horror, needed guidance on expressing her fear. We held daily check-in circles where she and I talked openly about nightmares, worries, and strategies to feel safe, like making a noise code or having a neighbor's number on speed dial. Rebuild trust at your own pace. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. I told my sons that forgiveness might come someday, but trust would need to be earned through consistent respect and proof of change. That message, firm but loving, laid the groundwork for future accountability. Turn trauma into purpose. In counseling, I found solace in mentoring other moms in crisis. Sharing my story reminded me that I was not alone and that my harshest night could guide others towards safety and recovery. That night marked a turning point. It was the darkest moment in our family's history, but it also became the catalyst for change. In its aftermath, I saw the fragility of the life we'd built and the strength we still had to rebuild. In the next section, Flight and Healing Rebuilding Life in Bakersfield, I'll share how, in the wake of that terror, Richard and I made the painful decision to leave Los Angeles. We'll explore how a small town, far from our past, allowed us space to heal, how therapy and community support became lifelines, and how picking up the pieces turned into a journey of renewal. Join me as we step onto the next chapter, one of courage, resilience, and the promise of fresh beginnings. In the days after that terrifying September night, our little apartment in South Central LA felt more like a prison than a home. I no longer recognized the walls that once sheltered birthday parties and bedtime stories. Instead, every creak and shadow echoed with memory of that violent invasion. My husband Richard and I knew we had to leave before the darkness swallowed us entirely. We couldn't bring our sons with us. The oldest three were already tied up in court dates and probation. Frank and Charlie were too close to the same destructive path. That was a heart-wrenching decision, but we needed safety for ourselves and for Christine. So 3 days later, under the hush of pre-dawn, we packed 2 suitcases, each left a note for our landlord, and climbed into the old sedan of Richard's friend, who promised to get us as far away as possible before sunrise. Why Bakersfield? It wasn't random. A cousin of Richard's had settled there years earlier and always spoke lovingly of its manageable size, close-knit neighborhoods, and lower cost of living. Compared to LA's rat race, Bakersfield promised wide horizons, real land, real sky, and we hoped real peace. When we arrived, the air felt different, cleaner, cooler, more forgiving. Our temporary stay began in my cousin's spare bedroom. Mornings sounded like birdsong instead of car stereos. Evenings were hushed beneath sloping hills instead of sirens. That contrast wasn't just geographical, it was a lifeline. Our first order of business was practical. Find a place to live, a job to pay bills, and school for Christine. With help from my cousin, we located a modest 2-bedroom mobile home on the outskirts of town. It had an aging AC unit, but a fenced yard where I could plant flowers, a small luxury that felt like therapy in itself. Richard quickly secured work at a local mechanics shop, thanks to his factory-taught mechanical skills. The shop owner, impressed by Richard's reputation for honesty and hard work, offered him a position as an assistant within the week. I applied at a bakery near Town Square, borrowing recipes from my LA days and mentioning Grandma's preserves on my resume. Within days, I was restocking croissants and advising customers on blueberry turnovers. Christine enrolled in a nearby middle school. Her first morning walking down a tree-lined street instead of a concrete sidewalk brought tears to my eyes. She waved goodbye, straight backpack on her shoulders, a small pioneer, stepping into the unknown. Practical stability was only half the battle. My nights remained haunted by nightmares, footsteps in the yard, muffled laughter, broken dishes. I knew I needed help, beyond prayer and determination. A local community center offered sliding scale counseling, and within a week, I sat in Dr. Patel's cozy office, walls lined with calming art and soft lamps. In our first sessions, I learned that post-traumatic stress wasn't a sign of weakness, but a natural response to violence. Naming the fear, calling it by its clinical term, gave it shape, rather than letting it lurk unnamed in the darkness. We worked on simple grounding exercises, focusing on the feel of the chair beneath me, the scent of vanilla in the air, small reminders of safety. Richard Ever, the stoic provider, resisted counseling at first, but after I shared how the nightmares kept me awake, he agreed to join a men's support group at the same center. There, he met other fathers grappling with trauma veterans, survivors of workplace accidents, and other family men whose strength had masked deep wounds. By voicing his fears and listening to others, he found he didn't carry his burdens alone. In LA, our routine had revolved around factory shifts, bakery hours, and scuttling home to manage 5 boys. In Bakersfield, we consciously crafted a new cycle. Morning walks at dawn. Before the heat set in, Richard and I walked the quiet lanes, sharing plans for the day, while watching the sun gild the farmland. Those 30 minutes of side-by-side walking reconnected us as partners rather than survivors. Family meals. Each evening, Christine set the table with room for only the 3 of us, lighted by a single candle. We passed around a loaf of fresh bread and spoke of our best moments and challenges of the day. This ritual anchored us in gratitude. Weekend projects. Saturdays became our fix-it days. We painted the mobile home's trim, planted a small vegetable patch, and replaced cracked tiles in the kitchen. Each nail hammered and each seed sown represented our commitment to cultivate life rather than fear. Starting over cost money. Here's how we navigated expenses without sinking into debt bartering skills. In grateful exchange for plumbing, help our neighbor fixed the AC. Another friend traded childcare for sewing repairs on his uniforms. Leveraging talents in lieu of cash stretched our budget. Secondhand finds. Furniture came from thrift shops. Clothes from consignment stores. I repurposed worn jeans into aprons. Richard refinished a battered table to seat us all. These small acts celebrated resourcefulness over consumerism. Emergency fund. Remembering our LA miscalculation on winter coats, we set aside $10 each week into a jar. When the mobile home's water heater gave out, we tapped that fund rather than running up credit card debt. Our Bakersfield chapter taught me that healing isn't linear. It ebbs and flows. Some weeks, I'd feel lighthearted enough to laugh. Others, my chest tightened, and I'd replay the past in my mind. But these truths guided us. Small steps add up. You don't need a blockbuster moment of transformation. A single session in therapy, a 5-minute gratitude journal, or one shared laugh can build toward larger peace. Community is crucial. Isolation deepens trauma. By joining groups, baking co-ops, church gatherings, neighborhood watch meetings, we wove a net of support that cushioned our recovery. Creative outlets heal. Baking isn't just a job for me. It's therapy. Measuring flour, drizzling glaze, watching customers smile. It reminded me that I still had purpose and skill. Find your baking moment, whether it's painting, gardening, or playing music. After nearly 6 months in Bakersfield, we felt strong enough to look back without drowning. In therapy, Richard and I discussed whether to tell Christine the full story of that night. We decided on a gradual approach, letting her ask questions at her own pace. We also weighed the implications of contacting our sons, whether support, boundary, or forgiveness depended on their readiness for real change. Soon, we'd learn more about their fate's information that would break our hearts and test our new stability. But for now, we concentrated on the present, building a life where violence no longer dictated our choices and where hope could blossom in everyday routines. In our next chapter, the ethics of retribution, justice, revenge, and moral ambiguity, we'll explore a crossroads we never imagined. How far is too far when protecting your family? I'll share why Richard felt compelled to hire help to teach our sons a lesson, and how that decision forever altered our moral compass. Together, we'll wrestle with questions of justice, forgiveness, and the heavy cost of taking matters into your own hands. Let's step carefully into that gray area where right and wrong blur, and consider what it truly means to protect the ones we love. In those first months in Bakersfield, when the hills stood still under the golden sun and our nights were quiet enough to hear our own breaths, I believed we had put the worst behind us. Yet, I carried a secret too heavy to bear alone. In the days after our escape, Richard had made a decision that forever blurred the lines between justice and revenge. While I lay in Dr. Patel's office, telling myself it was enough to survive, Richard was negotiating with a retired police officer from South Central. He paid this man and 2 of his associates to teach our boys a lesson, making sure they understood the price of terrorizing their own mother. He was adamant, "No killing," he told the officer. "Just a scare they won't forget." When Richard told me weeks later, I remember the tight knot in my chest. On one hand, I felt relief that our sons had finally received a reckoning for their violence. On the other, I was horrified that the man I loved had resorted to arranging an assault rather than trusting our fledgling legal system or family reconciliation. Retribution is the desire to see someone punished in proportion to their wrongdoing, an eye for an eye mentality. Justice, in contrast, seeks fairness through established laws, due process, and ideally, rehabilitation. In our case, retribution paying off the book's agents to inflict fear and pain on our boys. Justice, reporting them to authorities seeking counseling or juvenile diversion programs, or employing restorative justice circles. Richard believed the police in South Central were corrupt and that his son's gang affiliations guaranteed they'd escape legal consequences. He felt powerless watching them continue their destructive path, so he took matters into his own hands. Yet that choice came with consequences: guilt, secrecy, and a new moral burden that shadowed our healing. We traded one form of violence for another, even if intended to protect. History is dotted with stories of families and communities who, feeling betrayed by the courts, turned to vigilante justice. In some rural areas, neighbors have formed posses to hunt suspected thieves. In urban neighborhoods, rumor-fueled street justice can erupt after shootings or robberies. One cautionary tale comes from a Midwest community where a group of parents, frustrated by a string of car break-ins, hired off-duty officers to rough up local teens. The result: several teens ended up hospitalized. Lawsuits ensued, and the parents faced criminal charges for assault. The intended deterrent became a legal and moral quagmire. When we finally spoke openly about Richard's decision, he admitted that the act left him hollow. He carried scars that no medical bandage could heal, emotional toll each time he recalled the night his hired men cornered our sons. His hands shook. He relived the moral conflict, protecting his family versus betraying his own values. Legal risks. Had the officers acted outside his instructions, if they'd harmed our boys more severely, Richard could have faced charges of conspiracy assault or even manslaughter. Erosion of trust. We found ourselves unable to discuss our fears without tipping into recrimination. I cringed at the thought that my husband had orchestrated violence while he feared I would reject him if I knew the whole truth. Restorative justice offers a third path, one that neither ignores wrongdoing nor replaces the law with street-level punishment. It brings together victims, offenders, and community members in a mediated process where offenders acknowledge harm and take responsibility. Victims share the impact of the offense. Together, they negotiate reparations or community service. In my small support group in Bakersfield, I learned of a program in Fresno where teens caught in gang activity met with affected community PISU elders, local business owners, and families of victims. Instead of jail time, they volunteered at youth centers, repaired vandalized property, and attended conflict resolution workshops. Long-term studies showed lower recidivism compared to traditional sentencing. Had we known of and trusted such programs, perhaps we could have avoided the moral abyss of vigilantism. Reflecting on that epoch, I distilled a few guiding principles that others might find helpful when confronting their own too-far moments. Pause before acting. In any crisis, breathe, step back, and weigh alternatives. Temptation to respond violently often stems from fear acknowledging that fear can open the door to calmer, more constructive choices. Seek collective solutions. Rely on community resources. Civic groups, faith organizations, counseling centers before enlisting private forces. There's strength in numbers and shared wisdom. Maintain transparency with trusted allies. I should have known sooner that keeping secrets from my support network only deepened my isolation. Sharing burdens with friends or counselors can provide perspective and moral grounding. Understand legal implications. While the law isn't perfect, sidestepping it risks new crimes and unintended harm. Consulting a legal advisor or victim's advocate could reveal options for protective orders or diversion programs. Over time, Richard and I reached an uneasy peace. We agreed that while his intentions sprang from love and desperation, the method contradicted the values we'd long taught our children. We sought forgiveness from each other, promising transparency moving forward. And, in a full-circle moment, we donated to the very restorative justice center we'd once overlooked, hoping to give other families the chance to heal without crossing that ambiguous line. Justice is a complex tapestry of morality, law, and human frailty. Our detour into retribution taught us that protecting your family can sometimes lead you into morally gray territory you may never fully leave. In the next chapter, Planting New Roots, starting over in Charleston, I'll share how we left Bakersfield for a final fresh start on the East Coast. We'll explore how a cousin's kind offer in Charleston led us to build a thriving small business, reforge our family identity, and embrace community in new, healthier ways. Join me as we cross the country once more, this time planting seeds of hope in the South's warm soil. By the time we left Bakersfield, almost 2 years had passed since our flight from South Central LA. We'd stitched together stability, a mobile home with humming AC, steady jobs at the bakery, and mechanics shop, and therapy routines that steadied our hearts. Yet the West Coast still carried echoes of our past, familiar hills drenched in sunset, reminded us too often of the fields and freeways we'd fled. When Richard's cousin William called from Charleston, South Carolina, and offered us a guest room in his historic downtown home, we felt the tug of possibility, an East Coast fresh start, a place that knew nothing of our troubles. Charleston greeted us with a gentle humidity that hugged you like an old friend, cobblestone streets lined with pastel houses, and the low creak of shutters in the breeze. Gone were the endless sun and dust of California. Here, Spanish moss draped from oak trees, and the air smelled of salt and magnolia. It felt like a dream, one we hoped to wake up grateful for each morning. First things first, we needed housing work and school for Christine. With William's local insight, we toured modest rental homes in Charleston's suburbs, quiet neighborhoods where children still played in driveways and neighbors waved from porches. We settled on a simple 3-bedroom house with a large front porch, perfect for rocking chairs and lemonade stands. Richard walked into a metalworking factory near the harbor, his mechanical skills landing him a job as a machine supervisor. Within weeks, the folks there took pride in traditionally crafted ironwork railings, gates, and decorative grates, and he found satisfaction in seeing his handiwork grace stately old homes. Meanwhile, I approached a cozy corner bakery named Sweet Magnolia and shared my years of baking experience and family recipes. I suggested adding a few Kentucky-inspired confections, peach cobbler tarts, sweet potato donuts, and the owner loved the idea. Soon, I was helping design seasonal menus, and neighbors lined up for my morning pecan sticky buns. Christine, now 15, enrolled at a well-regarded public high school with AP classes and dedicated guidance counselors. She joined the swim team, something we never imagined in Bakersfield, and discovered a passion for environmental science in the Low Country's tidal ecosystems. Watching her thrive reminded me why we'd made the leap. True belonging isn't just about having a house or a job. It's about weaving yourself into the social fabric. We leaned into Charleston's traditions, church and fellowship. We joined Holy Trinity Lutheran, whose congregation spanned generations of Low-Country families. Sunday potlucks, choir practice, and midweek Bible studies weren't just spiritual. They became social anchors. I volunteered to bake weekly cookies for the children's ministry, forging friendships over mixing bowls and measuring cups. Neighborhood associations. Our block formed a welcome committee for new residents. I offered to host the first meeting on our porch. Humid evenings spent sipping iced tea, swapping local tips about yard care. The soil here is sandy, and favorite places to grab shrimp and grits. Local markets and festivals. Charleston's Farmers Market at Marion Square became our Saturday ritual. We sampled fresh okra heirloom tomatoes in the famous Hush Puppies. I set up a small stand, revealing my grandma's peach preserves from days gone by, and locals embraced my story of Kentucky origins with Southern flavors. By investing a few hours each week in these gatherings, we stopped being outsiders and started being neighbors. Invitations to backyard barbecues, community gardening days, and flea market trips followed naturally. In each interaction, we practiced simple kindness, offering to water a neighbor's plants, sharing homemade biscuits with the mail carrier, or returning a stray tennis ball to the neighbor's dog. My time at Sweet Magnolia gave me confidence, but the dream simmered in my mind. What if I ran my own bakery? Charleston's culinary scene was competitive, yet there was room for genuine storytelling. In early 2005, with guidance from a small business counselor at the library and a modest loan from a local credit union, I leased a storefront on King Street. Naming it Grandma's Sweets was more than nostalgia. It was a brand promise, warm homemade treats baked with love. I painted a pastel sign featuring a grandmotherly figure holding a pie and stocked shelves with peach cobbler bars, bourbon-infused pecan pies, and sweet potato muffins. Richard hung new shelves and counters over weekends, using reclaimed wood from old Charleston barns he'd sourced. The grand opening was humble, a ribbon-cutting ceremony with neighbors, a local newspaper photo, and our first paying customers, families pushing strollers and tourists drawn to the aroma of cinnamon. Within months, Grandma's Sweets became a cherished spot for breakfast pastries and afternoon pick-me-ups. I hired 2 part-time assistants, both high school students, teaching them the joys of measuring ingredients and greeting regulars by name. Owning a business brought its own challenges. Long hours in the kitchen meant fewer evenings at home. I learned to set boundaries, scheduled family nights, no matter how busy Tuesdays were, rice and story night. We cooked a simple one-pot meal, sat at our kitchen table, and each shared a highlight of the day. These 30 minutes nourished our bonds. Childcare. Help. I traded baked goods for babysitting hours from a trusted teenager in the neighborhood. While she watched Christine's younger cousin, I caught up on bakery paperwork or stole a quiet moment on the porch. Weekend disconnect. Sundays became work-free days. Even if the store's ovens sat cold, I attended church, strolled the waterfront with Richard, or picnicked in Waterfront Park. Those pauses refreshed me for the week ahead. Charleston taught me that starting over is both an inward and outward journey. Embrace local culture. Don't overwrite it. Introduced my Kentucky specialties, but I also learned to bake bene seed cookies, a low-country tradition, and shrimp and grits quiches. Blending traditions honored both past and present. Leverage your story, sharing my family's saga. 6 noisy kids in a tiny apartment. Flight from urban trauma rebirth in Bakersfield resonated with customers seeking authenticity. People didn't just buy a pie, they bought a slice of resilience. Invest in collaboration. Partnering with local coffee roasters, florists, and the nearby bookstore for Sweet and Read events expanded my network and brought new foot traffic to the shop. Grandma's sweets flourished, and our family settled into Charleston's gentle rhythms. Our home felt fuller, no longer haunted by past nightmares, but vibrant with new memories. Christine's high school graduation party, on our porch, neighborhood yard sales, and holidays spent with friends who'd become family. Yet the story never truly ends in a single location. We've learned that our past roots in Kentucky, trials in LA, healing in Bakersfield, feeds our present strength. Soon, our family line expanded again when Christine, now a registered nurse, and her husband welcomed their own daughter, Claire. In the final chapter, Phoenix Rising, Legacy Reflection, and Universal Takeaways, we'll gather all these threads, hardship and healing, mistakes and victories, into lessons you can carry forward, no matter where life plants you. We'll celebrate the idea that we can transform even our deepest scars into sources of wisdom and compassion, becoming guides for those who follow. Let's prepare to spread our wings and soar into the next dawn. Here we stand at the culmination of a journey that began in a dirt-floored cabin in rural Kentucky, wound its way through the turbulent streets of South Central LA, found unexpected sanctuary in Bakersfield, and finally blossomed under the oak-shaded avenues of Charleston. Looking back now, I see our family story as a lived embodiment of the phoenix, rising from ashes of trauma, betrayal, and loss, only to discover new strength in its rebirth. When I first held baby Claire, my granddaughter born in 2007, I marveled at the continuity of life. In her tiny hand, I saw echoes of my own childhood fingers wrapped around my mother's. That moment crystallized something I'd learned the hard way. Legacy isn't only blood ties or shared DNA. It's the values we pass on: resilience, compassion, and the courage to begin again. In practical terms, legacy is built daily. Storytelling as heirloom. I recorded our family tales of droughts, desert highways, late-night bakery runs, and the night we fled, so Claire and any child who follows can learn from our missteps and triumphs. When I read these stories to her at bedtime, I see her eyes widen with wonder and recognition that she too lives in a tapestry woven with hard-won lessons. Rituals that bind generations. Every spring, we have a seed day in Charleston, where Claire plants flowers in my front yard, just as I planted vegetables in Bakersfield, and my parents did in Kentucky. Those simple acts, digging, watering, watching green shoots emerge, cement our shared identity across time and space. Passing along skills. I taught Claire to roll pie crusts and measure sugar as soon as she could stand at the counter. Those lessons are more than culinary. They're lessons in precision, patience, and pride in craftsmanship. Our family story wasn't a straight line of success. It was a jagged arc, moments of joy, followed by deep valleys of sorrow. But each valley offered insight, hardship reveals inner reserves. When our home in LA became unsafe, we discovered we had reserves of courage and solidarity we never knew existed. Facing danger together forged a bond deeper than any comfortable routine could. Mistakes are part of the journey. Richard's choice of retribution. My early denial of domestic warning signs, our initial failures to seek community support, all were painful pivots that taught us about moral ambiguity and the importance of choosing restorative paths whenever possible. Healing requires both heart and action therapy. Support groups and community involvement grounded our emotional recovery. Practical steps, securing housing, steady jobs, small emergency funds anchored our lives in stability. No matter where you live or what challenges you face, these core lessons can guide your own Phoenix Rising process. Embrace your story, fully own the chapters you're proud of and those you wish you could rewrite. Writing down pivotal moments or sharing them with trusted friends creates perspective and invites healing. Cultivate a support network. Isolation magnifies wounds. Reach out to community centers, counseling services, faith groups, or informal neighbor circles. Even one empathetic listener can be a lifeline. Invest in small acts of renewal. You don't need to uproot your entire life to begin again. Plant a tree, enroll in a class you've longed to take, or volunteer at a local shelter. Incremental steps sow seeds of hope. Teach and learn across generations. Whether you're a grandparent, parent, or young adult, share your strengths and vulnerabilities. Mentorship, both giving and receiving, fortifies resilience. Balance justice with compassion. When wrongs occur, seek accountability through fair channels. Explore restorative justice approaches, mediated dialogues, community service, or reconciliation circles. Healing is most lasting when harm is acknowledged and repaired. Our home in Charleston is now alive with the laughter of grandchildren, the aroma of baking preserves, and the echoes of stories that span states and decades. Yet I know that life's cycles will bring new challenges, aging parents, the uncertainties my grandchildren will face, and trials none of us can yet imagine. But I also know we've built a family culture of resilience, openness, and compassion that will carry us through. Your own Phoenix moment may be just over the horizon. Maybe you're grappling with loss, seeking to break destructive patterns, or longing to rebuild after a setback. Take comfort in this: renewal is always possible. The embers of hope glowing inside you can kindle a blaze of transformation. Thank you for walking this path with me, from the dusty fields of my childhood to the pastel streets of Charleston. If our story resonates with you, perhaps it's time to begin your own chapter of rebirth. With each act of courage, each moment of kindness, and each choice to seek healing, you rise anew, just like the mythical phoenix, and just like Grandma Betty, carrying forward a legacy of love that no trial can extinguish.